Hey gang, I'm up like at 4 a.m. every day now. Sleep at around 10ish, which is kind of crazy because of the baby. And wanted to do some strategy talk and would like to do a solo cast until Derek gets back. But a lot of this is my personal work, anyways, which is like the goalie ranks and how I think they've changed and update for the new year. So going run through this really quickly. S tier, still the Rock Stallions because although other people have performed better or just as well in the DHL, is just the I've talked about this a lot of time, is the fact that he has three playoff goalies that just play most of the games. So like Shesterkin plays most of the games, Georgiev also, Jari also. So it's really tough to not feel like the safest. Barry moves up two spots because he's actually turned it around. If you look at, I'm not sure how, maybe I have to magnify this, but if you go by goalie stats since December, we have Calvin, me, and Barry doing the best. And that's why it's like when Derek gave me shit for not having Ben at the top, you can see like, you know, very small size. It's really hard. And again, which reminds me that these rankings are forward looking in terms of rest of this year. They're not keeper rankings, because if they were, Dan would be a lot higher because you'd want Ottinger and Saros for the next X years for sure over Allmark and Murray for like 100% sure. Dan would rank way higher than me, but this is for the rest of this year. And I think with Calgary, I think they're turning it around. And according to Dom from The Athletic, they have the easiest schedule, rest of the season schedule. And they had the toughest, if not the toughest, to start. So again, that might make people think that they're worse than they actually are. So and apologies to Dan. I think I got convinced to put one S tier team at one point, but now I think like as long as the S tier is less than the A tier, I'm good. I think that's the objective here, because I can't really, with Barry having two, again, full-time starters versus the A tier here, where like the second goalie is still a 50-50 goalie, and we don't know what's happening with Kochetkov. It's like it doesn't seem fair to put the Chinks with the A tier. The difference between A tier and B tier, once again, is that the A tier guys have two goalies that are winning teams, whereas Saros is great, putting up good numbers, but on a team that is unlikely at this point to make the playoffs. C tier Mike, I think Thompson has slowed down a bit, but again, the fact that he has two full-time stars, I think, and Demko still has yet to come back. Just this combination, I think, makes me more comfortable than the D tier. Now, the D tier, we have Husso, who, like, we knew Detroit was not as good as they were supposed starting out to be, and giving about 5-4-4-4-5 is in line with what we expected. Well, a lot of people expected Detroit would do. It would struggle as a team, and they just had a hard start because of Husso. And we have to downgrade this because Blackberg or Blackburn has come back, and we can see a certain mixture of starts. It's hard to say who's the number one goalie, and I think naturally that's why I couldn't put too many question marks, KSS, too high um, earlier in the rankings, because just too many question marks. Couldn't put them in A or S tier, and here we are. The question marks are showing up, and I have to downgrade them to D tier. John picked up Copley, who's on like a crazy win streak, so good on him on doing that. For everyone that was shitting on him for not doing anything about his goalies, he actually found one that at least in a 10-ish game stretch has been consistent. Flurry, like the Wild are winning again, so they're turning it around. So I put him higher, but John's gonna say why would I put him that high? Jake Kemper is back healthy. Rant has been playing a lot of games because we don't know what's happening with Anderson, Kachetkov, like the trio. Until we figure out the Ranta value, Jake would be here. But if Ranta is able to get a 50-50 spot, which is going to be pretty hard, then I wouldn't move him up. Or if Campbell somehow becomes good again, but definitely the Capitals are turning it around. John Carlson isn't back for another like for months, is what I heard. So that really hurts the Capitals, I think. But he's he's a solid goalie. And F tier, I don't know if people have been following the Wild to know that Gustafson has been stealing a lot of the starts from Fleury. In fact, he was almost like outstarting Fleury at one point. So that's why like I don't really feel like close to 50-50. And the fact that he's been winning um, almost all his games when he's in. Like since losing to San Jose, he's won 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh no, he lost to San Jose again here. But the point remains that he's been doing hella good, and it's the only reason. Like, is he really F tier? I don't know. Like, it's just that he doesn't really have a second goalie, so that's the only reason why. But if he had anybody, like if he picked up Copley or Copley, I would have put him higher, right? So Vladar, is just not playing that many games. Like even if I think he's disagree with Calvin, I think Vladar is actually a good goalie um, based on what I've seen, but he's just not starting. So like he won 3 games in a row here, a stretch, lost to Toronto, lost to LA, both by one, beat Seattle, but again, and Mike, too many question marks. It's clear that Florida is struggling, might not even make the playoffs. So whether it's Bob or Knight, they've just not been doing well. Schmidt's out of the picture, and Anderson, like huge question marks again. Huge upsides to move up, but it is what it is. And these aren't like fairly the rankings. Hopefully, I don't offend anyone too much. But like if you look at here, you can really see that there's only they match up well with how people have been doing. Peters, Barrage, Chinks with Dan doing well. And of course, my number one pick has never been at the top, but I just think like the Rock Stallions, no matter which month you pick, they're probably one of the top teams. And that's what I think I expect from an S tier, that you just are really solid. Like for me, Samsonov can take over Murray's job, and then I don't, Murray's not that useful. But it's still like, even now at this point in the season, it's still um, small sample size. I remember like we were talking about evaluating goalies, right, in the second week, and we were all talking about how my picks like Murray, Allmark, and Talbot, we were already dismissing Murray and Talbot as misses, and it's like clearly if you drafted any of these three goalies and you were struggling goaltending heading into the season, your goaltending would have improved dramatically. Which I mean, I think it doesn't prove anything, but I think the idea that you can't improve goaltending in the draft is not. I don't think it's based on anything I've seen, because goalie value is just super volatile. That's the main thing, season to season, because it's so tied to how good the team itself is. Like Saros is an amazing goalie, but the Predators aren't that good this year. So because there's this season to season variability, that's why it's worth taking a shot at certain goalies that might seem like they're not that good, but I mean, again, really tied to the performance of the team itself. Like if Vanacek looked like amazing when New Jersey was off to the hot start, but now that they're heading into, according again back to the Dom schedule of strength article that you can find on the Athletic, they have one of the hardest schedules to end the season. So it's easy to be influenced by the New Jersey hot start and feel like they're just gonna tear people apart. But now it's clear that Carolina is favored to win that division. All that to say, when it comes to goalie categories, it's just like it's outside of the very elite. It's not even that they're elite. You have to like the strategy is like not only do you have to be elite, you have to know that the franchise itself is going to be good for the next couple of years. So if you think like, for example, the Avalanche have a promising future with Makar, and they're able to keep a lot of their pieces for the next, 3 to 5 years, then Georgiev with is a very good pick because has a lot of value versus other teams where it could be more up and down. But like, who knows? Like Florida looked like they had all the pieces to be good for a long time, and now they're struggling. They're struggling to even make the playoffs. Um, and the Stars, for example, some people thought that they were going to lose too many people, that they're a one-line team, and that Signé, Ben, and a lot of the other roster was going to age. Klinberg was leaving, and but they ended up. Well, they're leading the division. They're favored to win their division against the Avalanche and the other teams, the Wild and the Jets. And so, anything can happen. So it's like you have to make an educated guess. Um, but I think goalie value shifts to so much that you can either get some good fortune picking one up or drafting one. And I don't really think that you have to get one, like build one up through the farm system, right? Like, so that's like you can just pick Kachekov or whatever, right? So, um, but enough about that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was we had a good chat at McKibben's with Jake and Derek and me, like and Barry. We had a good chat. We met up for drinks, and we talked about some some fantasy hockey stuff. And Barry was like reacting to my prospect video and then the prospect episode I did with Derek. And I think he brought up something I never really thought of, which is, or I never consciously talked about on any of my podcast, which is the idea. And he can reply or make his own video at some point. So, because I don't really remember 100%, but what my takeaway from what he said was how he turned it around from being 12th to first was the fact that his farm, he was lining up his guys or had people that would become usable roster players. And I don't know if he meant at the same time or he just planned it so that it looked like you came into the season. We keep 12 people, but if all your farm is playable the next year, then you're sort of like going in with 16 uh, roster players. So, and as a team that has well, I have the pieces to compete for the next couple of years, I guess. I've been doing sort of the same thing without really thinking too much about it. Like, for example, Sean Dursey, right? I kept him. He doesn't have high upside. I kept him on the farm. I upgraded him right away because I think he could be a solid 40-point-ish defenseman with special team upside and truck. And he's been everything that I expected him to be. So that just means that different. I don't know what that means strategy wise. Other than that, maybe different prospects can mean different values for different people depending on their timeline. Of course, if you're talking to Gobby, like his timeline is always 2 years, 2 years, like his farm is always too old. So like Anunen's 22 years old. He's playing behind Georgiev. I don't know like what the timeline of these uh this prospect is, and that's why like I've always thought our farm, like the way it works, because we only have 4 slots, is that it sort of not penalizes but definitely negates a lot of the value of high upside players that take a while to develop. But I guess overall what I take away from what Barry said is you do want to perhaps trade for people or like make it so that they line up right and you come in firing. So for myself, for next year, whether I for teams that want to compete an extra piece for next year, there's Michelli, who's probably on a 60, ish point pace. And if I keep him, next, I don't think he has the highest upside. Next year, I'm going to add him. I'm going to move him up probably. Um, and he can contribute, but he could be of use even though he's lower upside of people for people like gas, right? Like shouting out Mike, people that think they got unlucky this year, which they did with in terms of the injury bug, and with like a usable piece right away for next year. it could be someone like that. Like I don't know everyone else's farm that deeply, but I think maybe. So let's not just look at mine quickly, but let's take a look at the chinks, let's say, and who you might want. So probably not Zillinger, probably like a longer term prospect. Mercer has 21 points, so that's someone that could be a key. Jumping fast, key contributor next year. I've had Wallstrom before. He's just a purely good goal scorer. I don't know what's happened with him that he only has 16 points, but yeah, but these at least all three of them are playing in the NHL, which means that they can be actually like a big contributor next year. So I think I'd rather go for these type of players versus like, I mean, versus a Noonan, I guess. I'm trying to say, uh, versus people that feel like they're further away, like Podkolzin. I guess I imagine this like he was a top 10 pick, but um, hard to say like if he's gonna just get a role next year. So I think that's something to think about. If you look at Mike's team, then I guess going back, Schmid, because like Schmid is something that you could pick up next year, or like no one's going to draft him high, so that's why it's not really worth it. But if you can get a prospect that is currently playing that can like jump in the lineup right away next year, then that'd be good. And maybe like Luke Hughes is for someone he did great in the World Juniors tournament. Like Sanderson, he jump in right away. Mike was even playing him this year. So if you can stockpile a bunch of good draft picks, stockpile your farm with players that will actually play next year, then yeah, I think you can do like Barry says he pulled off a 12 from first to first twice. And so, I mean, I could see a world where you're getting rid of Schmidt for someone that plays this year, um, getting rid of Hughes for someone for a good value next year, for someone that like I don't know, like Gabi, right? That builds 2025, 2026, stuff like that. Um, I could see that. I could see that. Always be aware of basically lining up all your prospects to come in at the same time, I think is something to think about. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about categories because we were able to make the changes that I thought would pass, like the 3 or 4 changes. And I think breaking up truck, we should probably vote on that into blocks and hits plus pims, because they're just both, I guess, aggressive stats. And the reason why is I think it's really, we can debate about the goalie stuff that we've been talking about, and whether there's like a lot of rules that I'm not 100% convinced or sure, like, oh, should we have just 3 goalies every team? But there are indicators to me of when we should consider changing things up a lot, is when a lot of teams start adapting the same strategy or feel like it's an obvious strategy. So defenseman, it's kind of obvious now. It started with Dan. We call it the Dan strategy, which is to focus on truck plus minus throughout the lineup. But I think it was Jake was one of the people that did it for, I think, D's exclusively, not exclusively, but like focused on them. I started doing it, but then I posted a video to you guys, that I think it was the optimal strategy in this current setting, because honestly, you're not missing that much in terms of goals and assists, right? Like whether, for example, my team, whether it's Cernak or McNabb, who has 12 points, but a lot more truck in a week of 12, in a week of 3 to 4 games, or sometimes 2 games, there's not a huge difference between him and someone who has 20 points, right? And so what has happened is that the league has sort of evolved significantly with like even the fact that 200 points. Um, Derek has totally adapted that strategy to fill up the rest of his roster. So it's becoming even Rock Stallions like picking up Connor Clifton. Like it's becoming too obvious, and it's not really interesting. There's no interesting decision point when you choose between goalies, between defensemen, rather. So I think that's something to look into. Um, Breaking it up, that would be a main reason. And we had talked about adding shots before, and I know there's concern about um, rich getting richer, but also I wanted people to be aware of that. Maybe something to consider. Maybe that's too complicated. You can actually force in the scoring settings for certain categories to count for, I think, yeah, for a specific slot. I think so. Like you only count shots for defensemen. Um, and like the reason you want to consider that is just because we just want to add a different vector to consider between choosing different defensemen. It shouldn't really be super obvious because right now it is, where it's like if you look at the D's, um, all the points are not exciting. No one's really doing special team points except for Valimaki. So you usually just like sort by truck, pick the best truck guy that doesn't have who have enough good peripherals. And you just pick peripheral stats and you just pick them. So it's not that interesting. But if it was like blocks and hits plus pims or whatever, and maybe shots, maybe takeaways minus giveaway, maybe some other thing. I do think that eventually, I've mentioned this before, I do think eventually we're gonna do penalty differential because it's my opinion is really predicated on the fact that we want to reward it's going to start a whole conversation. So I'll just leave it at that. I just do think we will do something like penalty differential or negative PIM at some point, but probably penalty differential because we want to reward players for drawing penalties. And I know John's main concern all the time, and I'll finish with this, is that he doesn't want us to. He mentioned it so much that I think he's paranoid about this. So I have to say it, which is like he's scared that our league becomes a joke league or whatever with too many random categories. But I think that's just that's like it reminds me of the playoff discussion when we went to 8 teams. I think some people are freaking out too much about how things would change, and they don't realize like how okay the current system is. Like right now, for the last 3 years, we have me, John, Barry, and Jake, 4 teams that everyone would agree have the traditional, amazing fantasy hockey core that should do well, and they are. We've been dominant, and Mike even brought it up. Like we shouldn't like. It's not fun to see the same teams make it in the top six. It's like or win most of the time, and that's because these 4 teams are really strong at the specific traditional categories. So I think that we shouldn't. Even if we add one more random category, it's not like, oh man, we're gonna fuck things up, right? Like currently, I think it reflects traditional fantasy hockey teams, like how well teams do. So, even if we add face-off percentage, that's why I'm like open to all these ideas because right now the best way to compete is the traditional stats. I mean, Dan's trying to do the Dan strategy, or because he has to, or because not because he wants to, and he's still in the middle of the pack because other teams have way more point per game players, and so we should look at different ways that other teams can compete while those categories being um, known, or like these stats that people agree are good for people to have. Like penalty differentials are in different formulas to judge how good a player is. So like actual, so that it's also in line with what John wants, which is it reflects actual good hockey value. Like even shots, even though they're not um valued the same as like a goal and assist, obviously, but they are somewhat of a proxy for puck possession. And that's why it's not that bad to have that, and anything that is positive that happens during a game, so that when we're watching a live stream and being happy about it should be considered. Like even like I'm like, why do we have shootout goals and not shootout saves? Like when you're watching it, I think when your goalie is in a shootout and he makes a big save to win the game or whatever, you should feel like any positive event in the game should probably count. I think even in a small way, like you know, put shootout saves as part of game winning goals or whatever in that random category. I think is something to consider, because that category is whatever, anyways, right? You can have, we've seen it. Someone has 9 goals, but they have 8 game winning goals because all the teams that their players were playing were in different shootouts. So just wanted to vomit a lot of thoughts, I guess. I'm thinking. And yeah, let's hopefully we can get together this weekend despite not having house anyone's house being available. See you in the next one.